He returned his wallet, then saw the old photo inside. He almost walked past it. The wallet was lying face down on the sidewalk, half tucked beneath a patch of dried grass near the curb. Ben had just left the grocery store, 2 bags in hand, the sun hanging low in the sky behind him. He wasn't looking for anything, just walking, just thinking about getting home in time to put dinner together before it got too late. But something about the way it sat there, unmoving, unnoticed, made him stop. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. At first, he thought maybe it had already been picked through. It looked worn out, the leather cracked around the edges, the stitching frayed in spots. People dropped things all the time in this part of town, but usually they didn't stay dropped for long. He looked around, half expecting someone to be coming back for it. No one was. He bent down and picked it up. The wallet wasn't empty. That surprised him a little. There were a few folded bills tucked into the main compartment. Nothing flashy, but still something. A couple of worn business cards, old receipts, and a laminated library card with a name written in fading ink. Harold Whitman. Ben flipped to the back, finding a driver's license wedged behind an expired insurance card. The address was local, maybe 10 minutes away. Ben stood there for a moment, wallet in one hand, his grocery bag starting to pull at the other. The right thing to do was obvious, but there were a few ways to do it. He could drop it off at the police station. He could mail it. Or he could drive over and hand it back in person. Part of him felt like maybe it wasn't worth the extra effort. He didn't know the man. Maybe Harold wouldn't even notice it was gone. Maybe it wasn't as important as it looked. But something about the wallet felt personal. The kind of thing that didn't get left behind on purpose. The kind of thing that meant something to someone. Ben had lost his own wallet once. Left it on the roof of his car at a gas station. It had fallen off somewhere along the highway. He never got it back. But he remembered the feeling. That small punch to the gut when you realize it's gone. Not just the inconvenience, but the strange emptiness. Like something small that carried your life in it had just disappeared. He didn't want someone else to feel that way if he could help it. Back at his car, he set the groceries down in the trunk and sat in the driver's seat with the wallet resting on his lap. He looked at the address again. It wasn't far. A few turns, a couple stoplights, 15 minutes, maybe less. He thought about it one more time. Thought about how easy it would be to just leave it at the station and be done with it. But he didn't. Instead, he started the engine, turned the car around, and pulled out onto the street. As he drove, he glanced down at the wallet again. It looked like it had some history behind it. Not the kind of thing someone buys new every couple of years. The leather had that lived-in feel, softened by time, by use. Whoever Harold was, this wallet had been with him for a while. Ben didn't know what he expected to find when he got there. Maybe just a quiet thank you and a closed door. But something about the whole thing had settled into his chest in a way he couldn't explain. Like maybe this wasn't just about returning something lost. Maybe it was about showing up. For a stranger. For a moment. And so, with the sun dipping lower behind the houses and the road stretching ahead, he kept driving. Toward the name. Toward the address. Toward whatever waited at the end of it. The neighborhood was quiet. Ben turned onto a narrow street lined with tall trees and houses that had been around a long time. The kind with cracked driveways and paint that had seen better days. He slowed down as he scanned the numbers on the mailboxes. Some were faded. Some had fallen off entirely. He checked the address again, then looked up and spotted it. 1375. The house sat a little back from the road, tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges. The lawn hadn't been mowed in a while, but it wasn't completely neglected either. It looked lived in, just lived in by someone who didn't fuss over appearances. Ben pulled up to the curb and turned off the engine. For a second, he just sat there. The wallet was on the passenger seat. He picked it up, ran his thumb along the edge, then stepped out of the car. The walkway was cracked in a few places. He stepped carefully as he made his way to the porch. The screen door hung slightly off-center, and the front door behind it was closed. There was a wind chime hanging from a hook, moving just enough to make a quiet, metallic sound. He knocked. No answer. He waited a few seconds, then knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. He shifted his weight, looking back toward the street. The thought crossed his mind again. Maybe he should have just mailed it. But just as he turned to head back to the car, he heard the door creak open behind him. It was an older man. Thin, white hair, lined face, button-down shirt tucked into a worn pair of slacks. He didn't look surprised, just tired. The kind of tired that's been there for years and never really leaves. Ben raised the wallet slightly. "Are you Harold Whitman?" The man looked at him for a long second, then gave a small nod. "Yeah." "I found this," Ben said, "on the sidewalk, near Maple and 3rd. Thought I'd bring it by." Harold stepped forward and took the wallet without saying much. His fingers curled around it slowly, like he was checking to make sure it was real. He opened it, glanced inside, then closed it again. He didn't count the money, didn't even look at the ID. "Thanks," he said. His voice was quiet, a little rough around the edges. Ben nodded. He didn't expect a big reaction, just wanted to make sure it got to the right hands. But before he could say anything else, Harold looked back down at the wallet and started opening the smaller pockets inside. There was a moment where his hand stopped. Harold pulled out a small, creased photo. He stared at it, the corners of his mouth tightening just slightly. His hand shook a little, not enough to drop it, but enough to notice. Ben didn't say anything, didn't want to intrude. Harold kept his eyes on the photo, like the world around him had gone quiet, like he'd forgotten Ben was standing there at all. Then finally he spoke. "I thought this was gone." His voice wasn't loud, more like he was talking to himself, but Ben heard it. Harold held the photo carefully, as if touching it too hard might cause it to fall apart. He looked up at Ben and nodded once more. "I'm glad you brought it back." Ben gave a small nod, unsure of what else to say. The door didn't close right away. Harold just stood there, holding the photo, looking at something only he could see. Ben took a step back. "All right, I'll let you get back to your evening." Harold didn't say much, just looked at him one more time, then back at the photo. He didn't offer anything more. Didn't need to. Ben walked back down the steps, back to his car. The street was still quiet. The wind had picked up slightly, pushing the branches above him into a soft rustle. As he started the car, he looked once more at the house through the rearview mirror. The screen door was still open. Harold was still standing there. Some moments don't need a lot of words. Some things are said just by showing up. Ben came back the next day. He hadn't planned to. But something about the way Harold had stood there, holding that photo like it was the only thing keeping the past within reach, stuck with him. All night, Ben kept thinking about it. The way Harold's hands had trembled, the way his voice had gone quiet when he said, "I thought this was gone." It wasn't just a wallet. That much was obvious now, and Ben couldn't shake the feeling that maybe showing up once hadn't been enough. He didn't bring anything with him. No excuse, no plan. He just figured he'd knock, maybe check in, maybe not stay long. If Harold didn't want to talk, that was fine. He didn't expect anything. The house looked the same as it had the day before. Same cracked walkway, same wind chime tapping softly in the breeze. Ben walked up and knocked. This time, the door opened faster. Harold looked surprised, but not bothered. He raised an eyebrow. "Forget something?" Ben shook his head. "No, just wanted to check in. Hope that wasn't out of line." Harold leaned against the doorframe. "People don't usually come back." "I figured," Ben said. There was a short pause. Then Harold stepped aside, pushed the screen door open with his foot. "You want to come in?" Ben hadn't expected the invitation, but he nodded and stepped inside. The house was quiet, neat, but not overly so. Everything looked like it had been in the same place for years. The furniture was simple. A couple of old chairs, a small couch, framed photos on the wall, faded with time. The air smelled faintly like coffee and something older, maybe wood, maybe dust, the kind of smell that settles in after decades. Harold motioned toward the chair by the window. "You can sit there if you want." Ben sat. Harold lowered himself into the opposite chair. He held the wallet in his hand again. The photo was resting on the small table between them. Ben looked at it now. Really looked. The woman in the photo was smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a light blanket. They looked happy. It wasn't a posed photo, more like someone had snapped it in the middle of a moment. "That your wife?" Ben asked quietly. Harold nodded. "Her name was Susan. That's our daughter Grace." "She's beautiful," Ben said. "She was," Harold replied. "Still is, Grace. She lives out in Oregon now." He didn't say more right away, just looked at the photo again. "I carried that with me every day for over 40 years, Harold said finally. "Told myself if I kept it close, maybe the memories wouldn't slip away so fast." Ben didn't interrupt. "It's funny," Harold continued. "You think you'll remember everything. The sound of their voice, the way they moved through a room. But after a while it starts to fade. That photo, it helps. Even when I don't look at it, just knowing it's there." Ben nodded. He understood in a way. Not the exact same thing, but close enough. Everyone had something they held on to. Harold looked up. "I used to take it out when I'd sit in this chair at night. I'd hold it for a while, then put it back in the wallet, like a habit I never talked about." Ben glanced at the photo again. The creases were deep. It had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times, worn thin around the edges, but it hadn't torn. "I'm glad I found it," Ben said. "Glad I got it back to you." Harold gave a small nod. "So am I." They sat there for a while longer, not talking much, just quiet. It wasn't uncomfortable. Ben didn't stay long. He stood after a few minutes and said he should get going. Harold walked him to the door. "Thanks for stopping by," Harold said. "Anytime," Ben replied. And he meant it. The next time Ben stopped by, Harold was sitting on the porch. It was early evening. The sun was low, just starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Harold sat in a faded lawn chair, his hands resting on his knees, the photo lying face up on a small table beside him. He didn't look surprised to see Ben, just lifted his hand in a slow wave, like he'd been expecting him. Ben stepped onto the porch and nodded. "Hey." "Evening," Harold said. Neither of them said much after that, at least not right away. Ben sat down in the other chair without being asked. The air was still warm, but there was a breeze, the kind that moved the wind chime just enough to make you notice it. For a while they just sat. Cars passed on the street in the distance. A dog barked a few houses down. But mostly, it was quiet. The kind of quiet you don't hear much anymore. Harold eventually reached over and picked up the photo. He didn't look at it long this time, just held it, then set it back down gently. "You know," he said, "I didn't even realize it had fallen out of my pocket. Must have slipped when I was walking back from the corner store." Ben glanced over. "Do you go there often?" "Every couple days. Not for much. Just something to do. Habit, I guess." Ben nodded. He understood that too. Harold shifted in his seat, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. "I used to walk there with Susan. We'd stop by the bakery, get one of those little lemon cakes she liked, sit on the bench out front and split it. Didn't matter what else we had going on." He paused, letting the memory settle. "After she passed," he said, "I kept going. Same bench, same cake. Didn't talk to anyone. Just sat." Ben didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Harold looked down at his hands. "You'd think after all this time it'd get easier, that you'd stop expecting to see them in the kitchen or hear their voice from the next room. But it doesn't go away. Not really." Ben sat with that, let it sit in the space between them. "I think that's why losing the wallet hit me so hard," Harold added. "Not because of the money, not even the cards, just that photo. I've had it in there since Grace was a baby. It was always there. A kind of anchor, I guess." Ben looked out toward the street. "It's funny how something so small can hold so much." "Yeah," Harold said. "It really is." They sat there for a few more minutes. The porch creaked a little when they shifted. A bird landed on the railing, stayed a moment, then flew off again. "Grace called last night," Harold said after a while. "I hadn't talked to her in a few weeks. She asked how I was doing. I didn't tell her about the wallet, didn't want to worry her, but I told her I'd been thinking about her mom more than usual." Ben looked over. "How'd she respond?" Harold gave a small smile. "She said she'd been thinking about her too. Said maybe it was just one of those weeks. I don't know. Maybe she felt it too." There wasn't much more to say after that. Eventually, Ben stood up. "I should get going. Let you enjoy the rest of your evening." Harold nodded. "Thanks for stopping by." Ben paused at the top of the steps. "You ever want to talk again? Or just sit? I'm around." Harold looked at him. "I appreciate that." And he meant it. Ben didn't visit again for a couple of days. He figured Harold might want some space. He didn't want to turn a simple gesture into something that felt like an obligation. But on the third afternoon, he found himself back in the neighborhood, and without thinking much about it, he drove by Harold's place. The porch was empty this time. Ben parked anyway. He wasn't sure if he was going to knock or just keep driving. But after a minute of sitting there, he decided to walk up. He knocked once, then stepped back. It took a while, longer than before, but eventually the door opened. Harold looked about the same quiet eyes, same tired lines in his face. He blinked for a second, then gave a short nod. "Didn't think I'd see you today," Harold said. "I was nearby," Ben replied. "Thought I'd check in." Harold opened the screen door and stepped aside. "Come on in." The living room looked the same framed photos, same worn armchairs. But today, there was a small stack of photo albums sitting on the coffee table. Harold saw Ben glance at them and gave a slight shrug. "Was going through some old pictures," he said. "Figured it was time." Ben sat in the chair across from him. Harold reached for the top album and opened it carefully, like the pages might fall apart if handled too fast. "This was from a trip we took to Maine," Harold said, pointing to a picture of a younger version of himself and Susan standing near a rocky coastline. "It rained almost the whole time, but she didn't care. She always said the ocean was better in the rain." Ben leaned forward slightly. "She looks happy." She was, Harold said, at least in that moment. We didn't have much money back then. That trip was a stretch, but she planned it all out, made it feel like the world was ours for a few days. He flipped another page. More pictures. Birthdays. Holidays. A photo of Grace on her first day of school. Another of Susan holding a pie in the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour. Ben didn't say much. He didn't need to. Just being there seemed enough. Harold kept turning pages. Sometimes he'd pause. Sometimes he'd just run a finger across the edge of a photo, like the feel of it brought something back. She always made sure to take pictures, Harold said. Said we'd want to remember the small things someday. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just smiled when she told me to. But now I get it. They sat in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that doesn't feel heavy or awkward. Just quiet. Just still. Eventually, Harold closed the album and leaned back in his chair. You know, he said, I used to think people forgot too easily. That once you were gone, the world just moved on. But I've realized it's not about being remembered by everyone. It's about being remembered by someone. One person who keeps the story going. That's enough. Ben nodded. That makes sense. Harold looked over. I never expected someone to bring the wallet back, let alone come by more than once. But I'm glad you did. Ben didn't know what to say to that. He just said the truth. Me too. They sat there a little longer. No rush. No reason to be anywhere else. When Ben finally stood to leave, Harold walked him to the door. As he opened it, he paused. Next time, Harold said, I'll make some coffee. Ben smiled. I'll hold you to that. And with that, he stepped back into the fading light of the afternoon, feeling like something had quietly shifted. Not in a big way, but in a real one. The next time Ben came by, there were 2 mugs on the table. Harold had already made the coffee. It was strong, a little bitter, just the way older men always seemed to like it. Ben didn't mind. He wasn't there for the taste. He was there for the time. Harold handed him a mug without saying much, just a quiet nod as they both sat down in their usual spots. The photo wasn't on the table this time. Neither were the albums. Just the coffee, a light breeze through the porch screen, and the familiar sound of the wind chime tapping gently against itself. They didn't talk right away. It was becoming a pattern between them. Let the silence take its place first, then let the conversation show up when it's ready. Harold took a slow sip and looked out toward the street. You ever lose someone close to you? He asked. Ben thought about it for a second. My dad, about 6 years ago. It was sudden. Harold nodded, like that made sense. Was it quiet after that? Yeah, Ben said. Quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Harold leaned back in his chair, hands wrapped around the mug. After Susan passed, I kept waiting for the house to stop feeling so empty. Figured one day I'd walk in and it wouldn't hit me so hard. But that day never came. Ben listened. It wasn't the kind of thing you interrupted. People say time heals things, Harold said. I used to believe that, but it's not really healing. It's just living with it. You build your life around the absence. Ben looked down at his coffee. Some days are easier than others. Yeah, Harold said. And some days the smallest thing knocks the wind out of you. They sat like that for a while. The conversation stayed slow, but steady. Harold eventually shifted the mug in his hands. You know, after she died, I stopped calling people back. Friends. Even Grace sometimes. I didn't have the words. Didn't feel like there was anything left to say. Ben didn't judge him for that. I think a lot of people do that. It's easier to pull back than explain what you're feeling. Harold gave a small laugh, but it didn't sound amused. Yeah, and then one day you look up and realize the phone's been quiet for months. You stop expecting it to ring. Ben looked over at him. But it still matters when it does. Harold didn't respond right away. He just looked out at the street again, watching a car pass by slowly. Grace sends photos sometimes, he said finally, of her and the kids. It helps. Not the same as having them here, but it helps. He paused. That's what the wallet was for. The photo. I knew I wouldn't see Susan again, but having that picture with me, it kept something alive. Ben understood. That photo had become more than just a reminder. It was a way of keeping a connection to a life that still meant everything to him. You ever think about reaching out more? Ben asked gently. Harold nodded slowly. I do. I want to. It's just hard to know how. Hard to know what to say after so much silence. Maybe you don't need to say much, Ben said. Maybe just calling is enough. Harold looked at him, eyes tired but clearer than before. Maybe. The sky was starting to darken. Streetlights hadn't come on yet, but the day was fading. Ben finished the last sip of his coffee and set the mug down. Same time next week? He asked. Harold gave a slow smile. Yeah, that sounds good. As Ben stood and headed toward his car, he glanced back once. Harold was still on the porch, still holding his mug, looking out at the road like he hadn't looked that far ahead in a long time. And for the first time since they'd met, Ben thought Harold looked a little less alone. The next week, Harold didn't answer the door right away. Ben stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, listening to the wind move through the trees. It had been their usual time, late afternoon, right before dinner. But something felt different. The house was quiet. No sound of the TV inside, no screen door creaking open, no faint clink of mugs being set out. He knocked again, waited a few more seconds. Just when he was about to step back, he heard movement from inside. Slow, steady footsteps. Then the door opened. Harold looked tired, not in a way that suggested anything serious, but the kind of tired that settles in after a hard night of sleep that never really comes. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly uncombed, but his eyes still met Ben's with a quiet steadiness. Hey, Harold said. Ben offered a small smile. Hey, everything all right? Harold stepped aside. Yeah, just one of those days. Ben walked in. The house looked the same, but there was something in the air that felt heavier. The coffee wasn't made. The chairs weren't in their usual places on the porch. It was clear this visit wasn't going to follow their normal rhythm. They both sat in the living room this time. The old armchairs creaked beneath them as they settled in. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Harold finally broke the silence. Had a dream last night. Ben looked over, waiting. Susan was in it, Harold said. She was standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes, same way she used to. She didn't say anything, just kept washing, humming that little tune she always did. He paused, swallowing hard. I stood there in the doorway watching her, and for a moment, I believed it, thought it was real, thought maybe I'd just imagined everything else. Ben didn't rush in with words. He let Harold take his time. When I woke up, Harold continued, I just sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Couldn't move. Didn't want to. He looked down at his hands. That's why I didn't set the coffee out. Didn't feel like pretending everything was normal today. Ben nodded slowly. You don't have to. Harold leaned back, exhaling through his nose. It's strange, the things that stay with you. the sound of someone's laugh, the way they folded laundry, the scent of soap on their clothes. And then one day, it's all gone, and you wonder how long you'll remember any of it. Ben looked around the room at the small pieces of Harold's life still holding their place. The photos, the books on the shelf, the old radio in the corner. Sometimes it's not about remembering every detail, Ben said. Sometimes it's just about remembering how it felt. Harold looked over at him. Yeah, I think you're right. The conversation faded again. The sun had started to dip lower outside, casting soft shadows through the window. Neither of them made a move to stand. There was something honest in the silence, something that didn't need to be filled. Harold rubbed the side of his face and let out a small breath. "I'm glad you came by," he said. "Even on a day like this." Ben offered a small smile. "Especially on a day like this." They didn't talk much more after that. Just sat. Two men from different parts of life, connected by something neither of them could fully explain. When Ben eventually stood to leave, Harold walked him to the door. "No coffee next week either?" Ben asked. Harold gave the smallest hint of a smile. "We'll see." Ben nodded, stepped down onto the walkway, and turned back just once before heading to his car. Harold was still there, standing in the doorway, hands resting on the frame like it helped him stay steady. And even though the weight hadn't lifted, it had been shared for a little while. And that was something. The next week, Harold was already waiting outside. Ben pulled up to the curb and saw him sitting on the porch, a mug in one hand and a second one resting on the small table beside him. This time, the chairs were back in their usual spots. The photo was back too, lying next to the mugs. Not because it had to be there, but because Harold wanted it to be. Ben smiled as he walked up. "Looks like you beat me to it." Harold gave a small nod. "Felt like having the coffee ready this time." Ben sat down, picked up the second mug, and took a sip. Same as before. Strong, bitter, familiar. They didn't say anything for the first few minutes. The air was cooler today, with a breeze that moved through the trees and carried the quiet with it. Ben looked over at the photo but didn't ask about it. He didn't need to. Harold spoke first. "You know, I used to think this porch would feel too empty to sit on by myself." Ben glanced over. "What changed?" "I don't know," Harold said. "Maybe it's not about who's missing. Maybe it's about who still shows up." He looked out toward the street for a while before speaking again. "I called Grace the other day," he said. Ben turned to face him. "Yeah?" Harold nodded slowly. "Told her about the wallet. Told her how I almost lost it, and how someone brought it back." Ben waited, letting him take his time. "She asked who you were," Harold said. "I told her you were just some guy who showed up, and then kept showing up." Ben smiled a little. "That sounds about right." "She said I sounded different," Harold said. "Said I sounded lighter. I didn't know what to say to that." Ben didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. "I used to think the hardest part was losing her," Harold went on. "But I think the hardest part was letting people in after that. Letting anyone see what was still left of me." He paused and looked at Ben. "I'm glad you knocked on that door." Ben met his eyes. "Me too." They sat again in the quiet, the kind that had grown comfortable between them. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing that needed to be spelled out, just a steady presence that had become something real. Harold leaned forward and picked up the photo. He held it for a second, then offered it to Ben. "Here, take a look." Ben took it carefully. The photo felt thin in his hands, the paper worn soft by time. He looked at Susan's smile, the baby in her arms, the sunlight caught just right in the background. It wasn't a perfect photo, a little blurry, slightly off-center, but it didn't need to be perfect to mean everything. "She looks kind," Ben said. "She was," Harold replied. "She had a way of making everyone feel like they belonged, even people who didn't believe they did." Ben handed the photo back. Harold tucked it gently into the wallet, folding it into the same pocket it had always been in. They didn't talk much after that. The sun kept dropping behind the rooftops. Porch lights flicked on down the street. Somewhere in the distance, someone turned on a radio and let it play softly through an open window. As the sky darkened, Ben stood and stretched. "Same time next week?" he asked. Harold nodded. "Yeah, same time." Ben headed down the steps toward his car. Before he got in, he turned back. Harold was still on the porch, but this time, he wasn't holding the photo. He wasn't holding the coffee either. He was just sitting there, steady, still, watching the evening settle in around him. And this time, he didn't look alone at all. Ben showed up one last time without checking the clock. It had been a few weeks since their first meeting, but the visits had settled into something steady, not planned, not forced, just a rhythm that made sense. And today felt like a day to show up, even without a reason. When he pulled up to the house, Harold was already outside. Not on the porch this time, but down in the yard, kneeling beside a patch of dirt that looked like it had been cleared out recently. There was a small trowel in his hand and a few flower bulbs sitting next to him on the grass. Ben stepped out of the car and walked over. "Didn't know you were starting a garden?" Harold looked up, his hands dusty. "Wasn't planning to. Just figured it was time to put something in the ground." Ben crouched beside him. "Need help?" Harold handed him another trowel without a word. They worked quietly. The soil was dry but soft, and the bulbs went in easy. Nothing fancy, just some basic perennials Harold had picked up at the store. Still, there was something about the act of planting that felt bigger than it looked, like it was more than just flowers, like it was a way of saying that life could still grow. After a while, they both sat back on the grass, looking at the small row of freshly covered dirt. "She used to love this kind of thing," Harold said. "Susan, every spring she'd plant something new. Said the world always felt a little better when things were blooming." Ben nodded. "I get that." "She used to wear this old sun hat," Harold continued, smiling to himself. "Way too big, always slipping down over her eyes. I told her she looked ridiculous. She said she didn't care." He paused, looking at the spot where they'd just planted the bulbs. "I used to sit right here, watching her dig around in the dirt. Thought it was a waste of time back then. Now I wish I'd joined her more." Ben didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to fix, nothing to make better. Some things just needed to be said out loud. After a few minutes, they stood and brushed the dirt off their hands. Harold looked down at the garden again. "Won't bloom for a while," he said. Ben shrugged. "That's all right. You'll be here when it does." Harold gave a slow nod, and they headed back up the porch steps. The chairs were still there. The mugs were back out. The photo wasn't this time, and Ben didn't ask about it. He didn't need to. Its presence was still there, even if it wasn't on the table. They drank their coffee and talked about small things. The weather, the neighborhood. A story Harold remembered from years ago that made them both laugh quietly. It wasn't deep. It didn't have to be. Sometimes it's the normal days that matter the most. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows stretched long across the yard, Ben stood to leave. He reached the steps before Harold spoke again. "You know," Harold said, "when I first opened that door, I thought you were just dropping something off. I never expected anything more. Ben looked back. Neither did I. Harold nodded once, like that settled it. But I'm glad it turned into what it did. Ben gave a small smile. Me too. He walked to his car, opened the door, then paused for a second before getting in. When he looked back, Harold was still on the porch, hand resting on the back of the chair, watching the last light of the day stretch across the yard. The garden sat in the foreground, the soil dark and fresh, waiting. And maybe that was the thing that stuck with Ben the most. The way something as small as a wallet on a sidewalk could turn into all of this. A photo remembered, a conversation started, and a man reminded that even late in life, things can still grow. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.